Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Diogo Barradas. I'm a PhD student in Instituto Superior Técnico, and today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the censorship arms race that's actually happening at the state level. So when a government actually censors the internet for its citizens. So in this presentation, I'm gonna talk about four main questions. The first is, what is the motivation behind this kind of internet censorship? The second one is, who are the actors involved in this kind of state censorship? How is it performed, and how can we evade it? Usually, the motivation behind internet censorship, according to the government, is to fight internet chaos. But in practice, this is often seen as the blocking of messaging applications, or for instance, the blocking of websites when someone mocks about, for instance, China's president. Or even in Spain during the referendum in Catalonia for periods of political unrest. So in the typical censorship scenario, what happens is that Alice, for instance, a citizen inside the country ruled by a government, which is a repressive regime, actually tries to access some foreign service such as social networks, news websites, or torrenting services. And then we can see this state-level censor as a firewall between all the traffic that goes across the borders of this country, and which actively tries to block these connections. So the first question that you may ask is, okay, but can just the censor pull the plug on the internet and shut down it completely? Yes, they can. They have done so. And for instance, in this report, you can see that India, between January 2016 and May 2018, has actually shut down the internet completely over 150 times. And some other countries actually go also doing these kind of disruptions. Some countries only do this sometimes, for instance, to prevent exam cheating, or even in times of political unrest, such as the Egypt's elections in 2011, when the Egypt's internet completely was shut down off the grid. They can do this, but this has a cost. And we have two anecdotal evidences for when these exam shutdowns happen. So for instance, Riyadh was trying to get a job on an overseas company, but his Skype interview happened to be on the time where the shutdown happened, so he lost the job opportunity. Another example is Ali, which is a journalist from Syria, which also, due to these internet shutdowns, was prevented from doing his job in his newspaper. So one of these costs is actually citizen backlash, which contributes to the unpopularity of the government. And not only that, these backlashes also have economic impact. So for instance, those 5 days during which Egypt's internet was shut down, actually, this amounted to about $90 million in costs. So apart from unpopularity of the government, actually the country's sustainability is jeopardized. So censors can be smarter in trying to prevent citizens from accessing or publishing information. One of the most easy techniques to perform this is by using deep packet inspection, where the government can actually inspect those connections that are unencrypted. And so, for instance, if Alice tries to access the New York Times, in an article which has, for instance, the word Asia or John Oliver China ban, then the government could just shut off the connection to this web page. Other than that, the government can also actually inspect the content of the web page itself, and for instance, it could actually change keywords on the text or also shut down the page completely. Now we get the question, okay, but what if traffic is encrypted, then the government cannot inspect it, what can they do? One other example is DNS hijacking. So for instance, Alice wouldn't know where the New York Times is located, so she asks the DNS server located inside the country, okay, where is the New York Times? And this DNS server, controlled by domestic ISPs, would say, oh, try this IP, it's totally legit for the New York Times. Well, in fact, it's not, and then Alice would actually get a page, as we do get here in Portugal if you try to access some uTorrent website saying that it's not available. Okay, so now, whether if Alice knows this IP address, for instance, if some friend told her, so she could try to access the page, but then the censor can also create an IP blacklist and blacklist those IPs of websites that they do not want citizens to access. But then Alice can actually still use a network proxy. So what can she do? She can pull her request through a proxy that then will communicate to the New York Times, for instance. But in the same way that IPs are blacklisted, proxies IPs can be blacklisted as well. So this is not the solution. And this also happens, for instance, if you use some kind of anonymity services, as the Tor network, which proxy IPs can also be enumerated. So you can ask, okay, so this looks pretty bad. Are we doomed? Well, not at all. There are a bunch of network covered channels that can help you try to evade this kind of censorship. And now I'm going to talk to you about a few designs. There are a lot more, and you can talk with me after my presentation. So one of these first examples is protocol mimicking. So as we've seen before, Skype is important for people like to have business connections and try to get interviews for jobs abroad. So one idea is, for instance, to convert Tor web traffic or some other web traffic into the signature of the Skype protocol. So you basically record a Skype call, you see the timings and the size of these packets, and just encrypt your traffic to look like Skype. However, sensors can actually perform encrypted traffic analysis on this traffic, and also, for instance, drop packets for this Skype connection. And since it's just an imitation, and it's very hard to mimic the correct behavior of the protocol, for instance, when it is subject to errors, such as packet dropping, sensors can also identify that this is not a real Skype connection. So another idea is to use protocol tunneling by using the very protocol itself, the application layer. And an instance of this execution is, for instance, converting the data that you want to cross abroad to a matrix of pixels. You combine this matrix of pixels into your Skype call, and then you perform a Skype call, a real one, with this data embedded, which is keeps changing to show your data. Bragging rights, this was my master's thesis some long ago, and it works, and it's pretty cool. Another kind of approach is called decoy routing, where you pose a HTTPS request, where you stenographically tag the website that you want to access. So what happens is that the domestic ISP will just only see that you are trying to access some website that should be allowed. Then your request goes through, and somewhere along the path to the allowed site, you get a friendly ISP abroad, which actually recognizes this steganographic mark and redirects your traffic through a relay that actually gets you through New York Times. And then try to mimic the legitimate patterns of these allowed sites, what these guys do is to replace, for instance, images or videos that were actually in these allowed connection by covered content, in this case, the data website from New York Times. However, and sadly, this depends on cooperating ISPs, and it's difficult for you to actually tell ISPs that this is good and they should support this. So just for a quick recap of this presentation, we've seen that repressive regimes rely on internet censorship very much. Internet censorship sucks. And the sophistication of these censorship technologies is very close to what we are doing in practice to evade it. So it's really a cat and mouse fight. We're slightly ahead, but let's see what time brings. And thank you.